Hi Curslings. Today we are talking about the resilient Jenkins, as it has recently come out that Stephanie's husband was the one to file for divorce and not Stephanie. What? Now for those of you who don't know, in 2018 Stephanie left her husband Jeremiah Thompson, who is a registered offender. A year later, Thompson would be arrested for the kidnapping assault of a 14-year-old girl and is now serving a life sentence in prison for his crime. And as a result, the divorce between Stephanie and Jeremiah was never completed. So buckle the frick up, Curslings, because Mother has all the tea on the failed divorce of Stephanie and Jeremiah Thompson. Now, before we get into the delicious details of this disappointing duo, I do need to make it very clear that I am not siding with either party in this story, least of all Jeremiah Thompson, who, in my opinion, deserves to rot in prison for his crimes and never have access to his children ever again. Full stop. That said, there are things within these court documents that strangely echo and even rhyme with things that Stephanie, her mother Maurice, and even Desiree have said in the year since. It's also worth reminding everyone that Stephanie Thompson is a documented liar, and as such, some of those lies will be exposed further by the information in this video. Also, a massive trigger warning, as today's topic involves descriptions of domestic violence, child neglect and abuse, as well as sexual violence. You have been warned. With that out of the way, let's get into the dirty deeds, shall we? Beginning with Jeremiah's crimes. It has been a long-held opinion in this community that there was no possible way that Stephanie Thompson was unaware of her husband's criminal record, because his arrest in March 2019 was not his first offense.
Okay, I didn't know anything about my ex. I'm sick of fucking seeing that shit. I didn't know anything about the motherfucker, and he knew that. He could tell I was vulnerable, easy to freaking manipulate, and he used that. It wasn't until I was in a relationship with him for 3 or 4 years that I started figuring out who the fuck he was, because other people were like, girl, I just found out you date this, you've been married to this guy. Guess who the fuck he actually is, because I know him, I went to high school with him. And I was like, I didn't know any of this shit.
In fact, Jeremiah Thompson has displayed deviant behavior since as early as the age of 13, where he was placed on community supervision after reportedly trying to steal security cameras from a church. Yet, despite being placed under supervision, Thompson is reported to have continued a pattern of bullying and harassment by the Colombian newspaper. 2 years later, in 2009, a 7-year-old girl described to her mother how Thompson had undressed her and touched her. Her descriptions of the incident wavered, and Thompson pleaded to a misdemeanor charge. The child in question was Thompson's niece. A month after that, Thompson attempted to rape his own mother and pleaded down to a lesser charge than rape in that case. He was 15 at the time. Then, when Thompson was 19, he was arrested and accused of raping a 14-year-old girl who attended the same school as him. According to the arrest affidavit, Thompson met his victim at a Winco store. She went home with him where they had. When questioned by police, Thompson first admitted to meeting up with the victim at Winco, but then asked for an attorney. Surprisingly, the school administrators and teachers were made aware of Thompson's record in 2011, but not the students or the parents, due to state and federal laws, meaning no one outside of the faculty knew he had exhibited an escalating pattern of behavior. According to Jeremiah's mother, in her declaration to the court, she says that she told Stephanie Thompson about her son's criminal record when they first met, writing, "When Jeremy first met Stephanie Thompson and it appeared to me that they might have a relationship, I felt it was important that I, as a mother, explain to Stephanie Thompson the facts relating to Jeremy's criminal case and that Jeremy was a registered offender, which could be detrimental to her if they continued the relationship. I specifically remember sitting on the couch in our living room explaining the circumstances to Stephanie, at which time she advised me she was not concerned and did not care. Later, Stephanie and Jeremy were married. Their first child was born June 2015. Jeremiah would also confirm that Stephanie was aware of his history, writing in one declaration with help from his lawyer, "Respondent was aware of my criminal record when we were married and when the children were conceived and born." And in another, Stephanie knew about my record because she had gone to court dates with me. So even if we were to play devil's advocate here and say that these statements are false, it never happened, we also know that Stephanie was made aware of it by her mother because Maurice said as much in this loosely described interview with the TikTok creator formerly known as Slay with Alicia May.
That was a situation where she met this person and he had told her, you know, that he was a registered, and see, I'm afraid to say those words on TikTok, but we know. So, he was a registered, and right. He had her convinced that all of it was stuff he told her that all that stuff was stuff he'd been accused of, but nobody could really prove. And that he comes from a really, really large family. And it was my brother who did that to my mom, but he'd already been in trouble with the law. So my mom decided to make it me because I wouldn't get in as much trouble. And there was just this list of excuses, and she bought it, hook, line, and sinker. And when she first brought him to my house for me to meet him, they'd been together for about 3 months before she brought him over to meet me. And what really pissed me off is that she brings him to my house. Her brothers at that time were 7 and 8. And you know the age of the child he's been with. She didn't tell me that this man had this about him. And she brought him to my home with her younger brothers.
But the real smoking gun here is Stephanie's own admission to the courts that she knew, although she would also try to claim that Jeremiah lied about the details of his crimes to her, writing, with help from her lawyer, "At the time of our marriage, I did know petitioner had a felony offense on his record. However, petitioner misrepresented to me the facts behind his offense. Petitioner told me the victim was 17 years old and that it was consensual, but because she was not 18 and he was over 18, he was charged. The victim was in fact only 14 years old at the time of the assault. Petitioner never told me about his prior juvenile offenses, which included assault of his mother and a charge of a child that was pled down to a misdemeanor charge of communication for immoral purposes relating to allegations that he his 7-year-old female niece. As to whether Jeremiah misrepresented information to his wife, he actually would address it in his parenting plan declaration, writing, "The victim represented herself to be 17 years old. Had I been aware she was misrepresenting her age, I would not have engaged in sex with her. Personally, I'm of the opinion that Stephanie was aware. She was told. She knew, and chose to ignore it for selfish reasons, especially because she could have easily Googled it. There was Google in 2014, and this article was absolutely available at that time." Cursed editor here. In the time since I originally posted this video back in September, new information has been found regarding Stephanie Thompson's knowledge of her husband Jeremiah's crimes. The creator, Mel C, made a Freedom of Information request for the letter Stephanie wrote to the judge back in 2015-ish when she first became pregnant with her oldest daughter. This request was to the Department of Corrections to allow Jeremiah to be involved in his unborn daughter's life, which would ultimately be granted. However, what is scandalous about this letter is that Stephanie herself confirms that she was completely aware of Jeremiah's past crimes, plural, and had even done research into them, contradicting statements that she would make a decade later in early 2025. Yikes.
To the Honorable Judge, the first day I met Jeremiah, we had fun. We talked and laughed. He took me on a boat ride and he paid for dinner. That night, before he said goodbye, Jeremiah told me he was a level 3. My thoughts raced as I read all the things he'd done. I asked myself if I could spend the rest of my life with someone like him. What a family would mean. What kind of a father he would be. The kind of man Jeremiah is. I thought about the person I went on a date with. The person he seemed to be. One thing was clear to me. The person I had read about wasn't the same person I'd gone on a date with. Although, somewhat reluctant, I decided to go out with him again. Again, Jeremiah wasn't the same person as I read about. I asked point questions and pried at him to see if I could see him in that light. I couldn't. In the time that I've knew Jeremiah, he has done a lot to change for me. Even though I could see him as a sex offender. Oh shit, am I allowed to say that? He was by no means perfect. Jeremiah didn't think he wanted to be with one girl. He didn't think he had to listen to anyone. And he thought his treatment was stupid. That being said, I've watched as Jeremiah change himself to become a person I can say I'm happy to be with. As Jeremiah came to know me and I him, he told me about what happened. Jeremiah told me about how he wishes he could take it back. How Jeremiah wishes he could make things right for his victims. Jeremiah told me about the rugs and the essay he suffered as a child. He explained to me how his life twisted into the mess it became. Overall, Jeremiah tried hard to become, as he put it, a good person. Jeremiah could never see his life without me now. On his 21st birthday, Jeremiah didn't go to a bar. Instead, he prayed that God would give him a chance to prove he'd changed.
Stephanie and Jeremiah Thompson would be married in February of 2015. At the time, Stephanie was roughly 4 months pregnant, and she would give birth to their oldest daughter later that summer. The young couple would live with Jeremiah's mom and stepdad in their 1,000 square foot home in a pleasant suburb in Vancouver, Washington, which boasts a finished basement and somehow 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, despite the limited square footage. In October 2015, when their daughter was only a few months old, Stephanie and Jeremiah would decide to move to San Bernardino County, where they stayed with Stephanie's mother, Maurice, and her 3 sons. It's during this time that Maurice says that she attempted to help Jeremiah get a job and uncovered his criminal record, which Stephanie had not bothered to mention.
They came to live with me in California when the first child was 2 years old, just before her second birthday. They came to live with me together. And I tried to get Jeremiah a job at because I was on the Chamber of Commerce, and I tried to get him a job. And when he went to go to get hired there, the person who was doing his background called me because I was, like I said, on the Chamber of Commerce, and they answered to us, and she called me and she's like, "Reese, have you seen this guy's background?" So I was like, "No, let me go see it." So I went over there, got this paperwork, and it was even worse than they had ever told us.
Maurice claims that she took Jeremiah for a ride to talk about it, and he responded to her interrogation by deflecting blame and responsibility. Had he shown appropriate levels of remorse and honesty about his crimes, Maurice says she would have been more willing to believe that he had been reformed.
So I told him, I said, let's go for a ride. I want to talk to you. So I took him for a ride, and I asked him point blank, I said, "These are things I just never really knew about you. Can you tell me about this?" And every single thing on that list, he made an excuse for. And I looked at him and I said, "Look, here's what I want to tell you. If you had come to me and said, I did those things, but I'm a changed person. I love your daughter. I want to be better for her. I want to do right." I would have been your number one cheerleader. I would have been in your corner, and I would have helped you to make these better choices. But the fact that you're sitting here making excuses and telling me that this happened to you and that you didn't make these choices, I want you to know from now on, I will be the person you have to worry about coming between you and Stephanie.
Shortly after confronting the couple about Jeremiah's concerning criminal history, Maurice says that the couple hastily packed up their U-Haul and returned to Washington State, which according to court documents was in February 2016.
I went to work the next day, and they literally got a U-Haul and were gone before I got home from work. And I didn't even know when she got pregnant with Bella, the cute little curly-headed my baby. I didn't even know.
Adorable children.
A year later, in May 2017, Stephanie would give birth to their second daughter. In a 2022 video, Stephanie would explain that she has always wanted to have a large family, but her ex, Jeremiah, did not, who even got a vasectomy to prevent further pregnancies.
I had a hernia repair after my second daughter, and at the time, the dipshit that I was with was like, "We're not having no more kids, blah, blah, blah." He went and got a fucking vasectomy, like all that crap. And he was like, "You're not having no more kids, right?" So The doctor was like, if you're going to get a hernia repair, you should wait until you're done having babies. I wasn't going to have any babies because it was with him, you know what I mean? That wasn't what I wanted, but at the time... Anyways. Well, now it's freaking 5 years later, and I'm obviously having a baby, which is what I wanted. I wanted to have more babies. But I underestimated the kind of uncomfortable experience it was going to be to go back through that hernia repair.
This desire for a small family is also supported by Jeremiah's 2018 declaration, where he stated simply, "I didn't want more children." A year after their second daughter was born, Stephanie would take both girls and flee back to her mother's home in San Bernardino County, where she then claimed that Jeremiah was abusive and that she no longer wanted to stay in the marriage. Unsurprisingly, the details of their breakup are muddy, to say the least. According to Stephanie's version of events, their relationship was rife with abuse and control. Writing in one declaration, with help from her lawyer, "During our marriage, petitioner engaged in several acts of domestic against me. Petitioner isolated me from family and friends. It was so bad at one point that my family called CPS to do a well child check because it had been several months since they had heard anything from me."
At this point, I had moved to California, and I was living in California when she got pregnant. And my first reaction to her pregnancy was, of course, I was thrilled that my daughter was having a baby, but I could not believe she would be giving him a child. And I tried really hard. I came up from California to be here when the baby was born, and there was a lot of things going on in the hospital room that really made him angry that I got involved, that Stephanie wanted things done a certain way, and he kept telling her, no, we're going to do it this way. And I'm like, for God's sake, she's the one having a child here. Why don't you just back off? And so he used that to tell Stephanie that I wasn't a good person to be in her life anymore. And that began Stephanie and I not talking during that marriage.
Now, what I find interesting about this part of the story is that Stephanie actually addressed it in a recent subscriber-only video. But in that version, she said that not only did her mother and sister Megan call CPS on her repeatedly while she was with Jeremiah, but that the reason she had cut contact with them was because she didn't want a relationship with her mother, who she deemed as quote-unquote toxic.
She did call CPS, my sister did call CPS, but they never took the time to actually check on me themselves. Like, my mom wasn't even talking to me. It was the same situation like it is with me and Drew. I cut my mom out because she was, to me, a toxic person, and I needed space to heal before I could actually have that relationship back in my life.
Back in her 2018 affidavit, however, Stephanie, with help from her lawyer, would continue to outline her abuse at the hands of her husband, writing, "Petitioner would often tell me I was crazy if I confronted him on an issue, or tell me I was lying or confused. Petitioner also forced me to have with him against my will on numerous occasions. There were several occasions where I had fallen asleep and would wake up to Petitioner being on top of me and himself on me." It's worth noting here that Stephanie would also talk about this in a now deleted Facebook video from earlier this year.
Fast forward to when we started having our kids, and I was scared shitless because I started finding out who this motherfucker is, and I'm like, bro, I'm pregnant. Please don't be a girl because this guy's a creep. Of course, I have 2 girls with the guy while I'm trying to get the fuck away. Okay? It's not that easy. You've never been in a DV situation. You should really just keep your mouth freaking quiet. I don't know why that's not obvious to you. It honestly makes me feel like maybe it should have been you instead of me, because I sure as fuck would not be sitting here judging a woman like this.
You don't understand the situation. You don't know why I'm still married to him. You have no idea what I went through with that motherfucker. And honestly, the fact that everybody keeps bringing them up, I'd be so loud because my children are screaming right now and I can't speak over them. I'm in the bathroom. The only reason I don't speak on it is because you have no idea how triggering that situation actually is. Ever since I went viral and people can't stop bringing up his freaking name, I've had nothing but PTSD nightmares. Now, maybe you don't understand that. Maybe you've never had somebody wake you up in the middle of the night to do whatever the frick they want to you. I honestly cannot grasp how many women are the ones coming at me like this. I can't, bro.
Where in it she blamed her upbringing for modeling a toxic relationship dynamic. It's her mom's fault that she didn't know how to recognize a non-abusive partner or something.
The amount of people coming at me saying, you should have known who your ex was going into the relationship. Don't know who the fuck I was at 18. I was grown up in a heavily strict Christian household, homeschooled, barely ever let out of the freaking house. Have you ever heard of the Gothard theory? The Gothard way of living? My mom loved that. So read up on it and educate yourself. What that religion highly teaches is that you respect your husband no matter what. You have respect for him. And my mom didn't teach me how to look out for this, that, and the third in guys, or what the hell I'm supposed to go looking for in men.
Because I was in the throes of a domestic relationship, 2018 Stephanie and her lawyer continues, I didn't report these acts to the police. Petitioner was also physically abused, hitting me on several occasions, leaving bruises on my body. This is part of why he wouldn't allow me to spend time with friends and family. On one occasion, he grabbed me by the neck and me. Stephanie also alleged that Jeremiah was financially abusive, adding, Petitioner was also very controlling with finances despite the fact that I was the only one who was consistently working during our relationship. In her request for a temporary domestic violence restraining order in April 2018, Stephanie would tell a slightly different story. In the handwritten section, she described between March 12th and the 27th, right before she left with the kids, writing, he held me down in a cold, would not let me sleep, made me call into work, pushed me in the shower, wouldn't let me leave the house with the children. In another section, she said that Jeremiah was, quote, emotionally abusive. He isolated me from my family and didn't like to keep friends. And in another section that he, quote, intimidated me, controlled my comings and goings, wouldn't let me have money, cut me off from family, emotional abuse was ongoing, corrected me in front of his family, wanted to pry me out for money, forced me to have when I didn't want to, limited my food, and grabbed my arms to force me to stay home. Stephanie also stated that Jeremiah was to their daughters who he was the primary caregiver of, claiming that was in the form of neglect. I would come home from work and find the girls in dirty diapers. I left a bottle for the baby and that would still be full when I got home. He would keep them up all night so that he could come check on me at work. And in another section that she, quote, saw the beginning signs of grooming behavior, adding that Jeremiah is a registered sex offender.
So just because people are asking, since we're talking about the Jeremiah situation, which obviously I completely understand why people are concerned, right? Like that's, to your knowledge, though, you don't believe that he had done anything to the girls, right? People are asking. If you don't want to answer that, that's okay too. I know that's a hard.
I know I saw him. The grooming behavior was there with the older child. He was very much starting.
In a typed addition to her restraining order petition, Stephanie would include the following. It is only now that I am out of the situation that I am able to start seeing things I did not see before. In the time we were together, we lived in his family home with his stepdad. Between the two of them, I was constantly told how stupid I was. I was deprived of sleep and isolated from family and friends. My husband always corrected me about the feeding and the care of our daughters as if I never knew what I was doing. We had to stop attending church because he didn't want our oldest daughter playing with other children. That all sounds strangely familiar, doesn't it, Curslings? In fact, a lot of this is going to sound familiar in the context of what we now know about Stephanie Thompson and the resilient Jenkins in general. Sometime in early March 2018, Stephanie continues, I decided it was time for me to leave. When Jeremiah suspected I was leaving, he began to physically attack me. He pushed me in the shower and grabbed my arms to stop me. On March 27th, which is the day she left, he called 911 and said I was trying to leave with his daughters. Now there's a small typo here. She means to say her own sister. My sister showed up at the same time, and between the 911 operator and my sister, I was able to take my daughters and leave. I drove straight to my mother's home in 29 Palms, California. Since I have been here, he has threatened to come and take the girls from me. He has warned me that if I start seeing someone else, they will end up. An anonymous family friend called CPS in Washington State and a case was opened. The caseworker said there was a history and substantial risk. However, until there was current evidence, they would just continue to monitor. As of now, the caseworker has made it very clear that I may not return with my children to the home with my husband. Now, this last part is interesting because according to Stephanie's mom on a 2025 TikTok livestream panel, the reason Stephanie left Jeremiah was because CPS had started an investigation, and it's that made her leave. They gave her an ultimatum, supposedly.
She was with her husband.
Okay.
And because he's a registered bad guy, we all thought he was grooming. But we finally got a CPS worker to go there. And I was in California making these calls up to Washington. And of course they're asking me, how do you know this? How do you know what's going on? And I said, look, I know what's going on. I've been there a couple times, and I'm telling you, this is what's happening. So the CPS worker went, and she found enough proof that she told Stephanie, you either pack yourself up and leave, or we are going to take the kids into custody.
It's also worth noting that this is now disputed by Stephanie, who wrote in a recent Facebook comment, CPS never said that. That is something my mother claimed. In fact, when CPS was involved with me and my ex-husband, we had a family counselor who came and sat with us for multiple different meals and family interactions, and they left saying there was nothing for them to stay involved with this family for. CPS was no longer involved in my situation when I decided to leave my ex on my own regard. Never have I ever said anything about him grooming my daughters, so that is just information you decided to put out there because you know of his record. Interesting. Well, if that's not true, that Jeremiah never groomed their daughters, how come she put it on her petition for a temporary domestic restraining order? That's an awfully strange thing to lie about, isn't it?
For instance, my mom mentioned that when I was with my ex, it was an ultimatum with CPS. Either I leave him or I get my kids taken away. That was not the case. In fact, when I was dealing with CPS with my ex, we ended up having a family therapist who came in for a few visits. She stayed there while we were making dinner and just doing our normal family thing. And she said, I don't see anything wrong with this family. We don't need to stay in this situation. CPS was out of my life when it came to my ex. I left voluntarily because I was done with his crap. I figured out who the frick he actually was, and I left running.
As for Jeremiah's version of events, they paint a different story altogether. If Stephanie is the battered woman valiantly escaping her captor, Jeremiah is the betrayed husband who was blindsided by his wife's infidelity. Writing in this affidavit, I'm surprised Stephanie left. I loved her, and I still feel like we're connected. All the more to say, I'm afraid that Stephanie and her family have made it so hard for me to see my daughters. In another, Jeremiah claimed that Stephanie's sister, Megan, was the reason for why their marriage had started to break down. Writing with help from his lawyer, Megan began interfering in the children's care and social development by unilaterally taking them to restaurants and recreational activities without notifying us. I objected to her attempts to bond with the children in a quasi-parental manner. Respondent did not. He also claimed that, quote, Stephanie left a safe environment in order to explore new interests in California, Stephanie should be in jail for kidnapping, and that Stephanie, quote, expressed she wanted to be with more men. She said she was becoming more uninterested with me. In fact, Jeremiah even provided proof of Stephanie's infidelity, a Facebook Messenger conversation between her and her sister. Unfortunately, the screenshots are too grainy to read in their entirety, but I did do my best to enhance them for you all the same. The first image begins with Megan's reply to a request for Plan B or similar morning after pill, writing, I might, but I don't know if you could trust it. Can you get free birth control in California? I know you can in Oregon. To which Stephanie replies, yeah, I should be able to. It's a far drive, and I don't have anyone to help with the girls while I go to Planned Parenthood. After, her sister offers to see if she has any leftover Plan B that she can send to her, Stephanie then asks, but what about if my body already got pregnant from the sex I've had? I'm just nervous. And Megan sensibly replies, did you not use protection? Stephanie's reply to Megan's question is hard to read, but she appears to describe how they use the pull-out method, adding that they started with condoms, as though that makes it any better. Megan, thankfully, gives Stephanie some big sister scolding, and then asks her when her last period was, and when she had the quote-unquote oopsie. Stephanie's responses to those questions are illegible. But Megan's reaction to Stephanie's statement, "The timing is too good," suggests that there was a very real possibility that she might have conceived. So in other words, Stephanie was absolutely cheating on her husband in California and doing so in a reckless manner to pursue new partners. In fact, Jeremiah firmly believed that Stephanie had left him in part because he didn't want more kids, and she did, writing in one affidavit, "I didn't want more children. For Stephanie's sake, I promised we would buy a house instead of having more kids." That idea seemed to bother Stephanie.
At the time, the dipshit that I was with was like, "We're not having no more kids, blah, blah, blah." He went and got a fucking vasectomy, like all that crap.
He also claimed that he had managed to save $8,000 and secure a loan for an additional $4,000 for a total of $12,000, which he planned to use for a down payment on a home, $11,000 of which he says Stephanie allegedly stole and gave to her brother when she left. That said, no proof of this alleged theft appears in any of the financial records that were provided in the court documents I received. And according to Maurice, this is a fabrication. As far as she knows, Stephanie never stole money from Jeremiah, let alone gave it to one of her brothers. As for the alleged child neglect and Jeremiah's mother would make a statement about it on his behalf, writing, "After their oldest was born, I observed Jeremy and Stephanie taking excellent care of her. They both washed baby clothes, fed their daughter, changed diapers, assisted in cleaning the family home, and cooking meals. Their second child was born in May 2017. Jeremy, at the time, was studying welding at Clark Community College. Stephanie went back to work shortly after giving birth to her second child. Jeremy took over all responsibilities of caring for both daughters, not only while Stephanie was at work, but when Stephanie and Jeremy were at home together, at which time they both cared for both their daughters." His mother would note in a follow-up statement that she had separated from Jeremiah's stepdad at some point during their marriage, writing, "I am now divorced from James. The last time I observed Jeremy and Stephanie together was when I had dinner with the family in what was the family home for Stephanie, Jeremy, Jim, and I. Both Jeremy and Stephanie prepared a complete Thanksgiving dinner for the four of us. During my visit, I did not observe any hostility between Jeremy and Stephanie." Jeremiah's stepdad was more to the point in his declaration, literally, but his statement echoed his ex-wife's, writing, "During the time the parties lived in my home, I observed no domestic and no signs of by either party toward the other. I did not observe any arguments between the parties. I never saw Jeremiah treat Stephanie or the children in any manner other than respect and love. From November 2017 to March 2018, I observed Jeremiah act as the primary caregiver for the children, including bathing, feeding, and diapering." Whatever the case, things finally came to a head when Stephanie took the kids to her sister's place in Oregon, where Jeremiah wrote, with help from his lawyer, on March 20th, 2018, "Respondent took the children to Clackamas County for what was represented to me to be a temporary visit." It's worth noting that this visit was in response to Stephanie wanting to take a relationship break from her husband. On March 27th, 2018, Jeremiah, and his lawyer continues, "Respondent met me with the children, informed me that she was moving to California with the children permanently, and has not permitted me to communicate with the children since." In his other declaration, Jeremiah alleged that Stephanie had actually stayed with her sister on and off over a period of 2 weeks, beginning on March 10th, before finally moving to California. Either way, it's clear that he had no choice but to allow her to leave, which he eventually did. After arriving in California, Maurice says that her daughter was an emotional wreck. Contact with Jeremiah was cut even further, much to his frustration, and things between the couple rapidly dissolved. It got so bad, in fact, that in her 2018 declaration, Stephanie says that Jeremiah made several calls to the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office to perform wellness checks on their two daughters, which she seems to imply was harassment. Jeremiah also mentioned these calls to the county sheriff's office, explaining in his affidavit, "Stephanie and her family show no concern for either girl's well-being. If they did, she wouldn't try to make a welfare check out to be a bad thing. She wouldn't isolate two wonderful children from a father who loves and protects them."
She was incredibly suicidal when she came down there. We couldn't leave her alone with her kids. Between her three brothers and myself, one of us always had to be home to be with her and the kids. And he was really threatening to come and take the kids from her because she wasn't stable.
On April 17th, 2018, around 3 weeks after she left her husband, Stephanie Thompson would file a petition for a temporary domestic protection order in the state of California, where she outlined the she says to have experienced at the hands of her husband. These claims were refuted by Jeremiah, who wrote in one affidavit, "Stephanie believed that my stepfather was a danger to the children, which I dispute. She has also made unfounded allegations of domestic and has filed a petition for a domestic protection order in California. And in another, when I wanted to check on my daughter's well-being, Stephanie filed a restraining order to stop me from checking on them. His lawyer also refuted Stephanie's claim on behalf of his client, writing, "The respondent denies the allegations made by the petitioner relating to there is nothing in the allegations that relate to the parties' 2 minor children, except that it is the opinion of the respondent that the petitioner is grooming the parties' 2 minor children relating to future sexual misconduct between the children and their father." In other words, Stephanie had failed to provide sufficient details or proof of the alleged grooming or that she now denies to have even happened. Jeremiah would also allege that Stephanie had her older brother go to his parents' home in Vancouver, Washington to threaten him, writing in one affidavit, "I didn't open the door and he left, but Stephanie's mother texted me asking why I was hiding from them." Meanwhile, Stephanie claims that Jeremiah had hacked her Facebook account and changed her mailing address, although she admitted that she couldn't prove that Jeremiah had been the one to change that information.
Jeremiah had hacked her Facebook page, and so he was reading her messages that she was sending between her siblings and I.
For what it's worth, Jeremiah's lawyer would acknowledge that his client had accessed Stephanie's Facebook messages, writing, "Respondent left her laptop computer at the party's home, logged into Facebook when she left." Petitioner also found an exchange of text messages between respondent and her sister. This exchange included a discussion of whether the sister knew if the respondent could procure free Plan B emergency contraceptives in California. Now, interestingly, while all of these shenanigans were unfolding, Jeremiah would file his petition to dissolve their marriage on April 23, 2018. That day, a motion was filed requiring Stephanie to appear with the children in Washington state and, quote, "show cause why this court should not exercise jurisdiction." A motion was also filed for a temporary family law order, a proposed temporary parenting plan, a financial declaration, a motion to appoint a family evaluator/investigator, as well as supporting information and other declarations, which Stephanie would be served with 2 days later on the 25th. Jeremiah, on the other hand, would not be served with Stephanie's temporary restraining order, which she filed on the 17th, until May 1st, meaning that in the space of a week, 6 days to be exact, Stephanie had filed a temporary restraining order and Jeremiah had filed in court to divorce her and establish custody. Now this, fortunately for us, isn't a chicken or egg situation, as from what I can tell, Jeremiah had retained counsel well before Stephanie had filed her petition for a restraining order in California, likely because she had taken the children over state lines without his permission and was refusing to allow him to see or speak with them. And we know this because Jeremiah would mention that Maurice had reached out to his lawyers on April 20th in the motion for a temporary family law order and restraining order. So in other words, Jeremiah was already in the process of doing this. In fact, months later, Jeremiah would claim in a handwritten statement that Stephanie had agreed to have the temporary restraining order dismissed. Whether she did or not, I don't know. As for the restraining order, Jeremiah's team had issues with it. The first and primary one being that it had incorrectly indicated that Stephanie had resided with her mother in California since March 2017, specifically in the section related to child custody. This led to Jeremiah's mother and stepfather making declarations that confirmed that Stephanie had in fact resided in the home up until March 2018. And even Jeremiah's lawyer wondered how this could be true since their youngest daughter would be born 2 months later in May 2017 in Washington state. The incorrect date also called into question the enforcement of the temporary restraining order in general, as technically California would not have jurisdiction over Washington state residents. For all intents and purposes, Stephanie was in California in body only, and nothing that Jeremiah had done since Stephanie's arrival met the basis for a restraining order, with Jeremiah's lawyer explaining, in this case, the petition makes no allegations of any acts in California since March 2018, nor any acts directed to California other than petitioner's attempts to contact the children. In the absence of an alleged act of domestic violence directed to California, the court should find that California lacked personal jurisdiction and disregard the protective order. In his statements, Jeremiah claimed that Stephanie was attempting to quote-unquote win jurisdiction, presumably to force him to fight for custody in California over Washington state, an opinion that Jeremiah's lawyer appears to have shared because he framed the restraining order as forum shopping, writing, "Respondent's good faith in seeking the California domestic order is called into question by her statement to petitioner that she was leaving because she wanted to meet other men. When respondent first indicated her intent to leave Washington for California with the children on about March 10th, 2018, petitioner called 911 to attempt to stop her leaving. Respondent's sister arrived and convinced petitioner to allow respondent to go to her house in Tualatin, Oregon, with the children for what he believed would be a temporary period. This separation became permanent on March 28th, 2018, when respondent took the children to California. Notably, respondent did not seek a restraining order in either Washington or Oregon. Jeremiah's lawyer would go on to request that California dismiss the temporary restraining order. What is unclear, however, is whether California dismissed it or Stephanie did, as stated by Jeremiah in a later declaration. But what we do know is that a similar temporary order would be put into place by the state of Washington, which more or less upheld the same stipulations, including allowing Stephanie to remain with the kids in California and blocking Jeremiah from directly contacting them. Now, while Stephanie had alleged spousal child neglect, and even supposed grooming, Jeremiah had also raised concerns, specifically about Maurice's home in 29 Palms in San Bernardino County, which Jeremiah's lawyer described to the court. Currently, respondent and the children live in a 3-bedroom manufactured home with her mother, her mother's boyfriend, and 3 of her brothers. There were also 4 cats in the manufactured home. In an affidavit written by Jeremiah with help from his lawyer, he also expressed concern about the home being too small, writing, "Respondent's current residence is a 3-bedroom manufactured home. There is insufficient space to adequately house 7 people with 3 adult dogs and several pups." It is worth noting here that I have no idea if cats and dogs were present in Maurice's home back in 2018 or not. I have no idea. What I can say, though, is that it's a lot of animals either way, and it sounds awfully familiar. As for the house in 29 Palms, I also can't speak to how it appeared when Maurice lived there with her boyfriend and 3 sons, as I was able to find some information on the property and can confirm that it was indeed a 3-bedroom house. However, the images attached to this listing are not dated, so I cannot tell you when these pictures were taken and whether or not the property looked this way when Maurice and her family lived there. What I can say for sure is that the property was last sold in 2022 and is currently off market. Maurice and her family, including Stephanie and her daughters, appear to have moved back to Oregon around 2020-ish. As for Jeremiah's concerns, he was of the belief that Stephanie was isolating the girls, writing in an affidavit, "She has refused to show up to any court dates and is isolating the children so that her mother can get paid through the state to stay home," which is technically true. Stephanie did not appear in person at any of their court hearings, and her mother Maurice was serving as a full-time caregiver of her granddaughters, and would continue to do so until Stephanie moved in with Jenkins in 2022.
Stephanie was living with me, and people always say that she was living with me in my 3-bedroom house. That was in California.
Okay.
Here in Oregon, we were in a 3-bedroom apartment. And my other daughter and I were living in that apartment first, in the 3-bedroom apartment. And I was the full-time caregiver for Megan's, my other daughter's baby.
Okay.
And Stephanie's 2 kids would come over there, and then I would watch all 3 of them. And
Yeah.
And then Stephanie went into rehab, lost her job, went into rehab, and so we let her move in with us.
Right.
Okay. Her sister tolerated it for 3 months before she had to get out and just let Stephanie live with me because it was... Anyhow, so then it was Stephanie had her own room, the girls had their own room, and I had my own room, and I was still providing full-time care for all 3 girls. I was just going to Megan's apartment to watch her child and then come back to watch Stephanie's because Stephanie worked the night shift.
Right.
That's when she met Drew.
Jeremiah also raised concerns over the cleanliness of the home, as not only was the space small and packed with people and animals, but the property was also infested with bed bugs, according to a Facebook conversation between Stephanie and her then 16-year-old brother Nathan, where Stephanie complained, "I got bed bugs," and her brother simply replied, "Everyone does. The whole house." Finally, Jeremiah included a photo of each of his daughters, writing in one affidavit, "The last picture I have of my older daughter shows what looks like bruises around her eye," and in a handwritten statement attached to a December 2018 motion to adjust their parenting and custody order, last photo of daughter showed possible bruising. Now, I do happen to have copies of those photos, but they are black and white photocopies of the originals that were then scanned into the digital court records, meaning that the images are so dense that I can't confirm the presence of bruising. Although I have to imagine that something had to be visible for Jeremiah's lawyer to submit it to the courts to begin with. That said, I also find it extremely interesting that 4 years later, Stephanie would be accused of giving Drew's son, DS, a black eye by DHS and his mother, Desiree. As for the divorce proceedings of Stephanie and Jeremiah Thompson, they would come to an abrupt end in April 2019 when Jeremiah was arrested in Salem, Oregon. Throughout these court documents that I have presented to you, Jeremiah and his family had made multiple statements insisting that he was no longer at risk of reoffending, with Jeremiah writing in one affidavit, "I have undergone a mental health evaluation to assess the risk I might reoffend, and the evaluator has determined that I am not a risk to reoffend." And his stepdad in another, "I never observed any inappropriate behavior by Jeremiah toward the children or any signs of grooming the children for future." And yet, almost exactly 1 year after his wife left him and took the kids to California, Jeremiah did just that. On March 14th, 2019, Jeremiah Thompson kidnapped and a minor who was under the age of 14. He was arrested on a warrant by Salem police on April 6th and charged with 2 counts of first degree unlawful penetration and first degree kidnapping. At the time of his crime, Stephanie Thompson lived with her mother in San Bernardino County. The Stephanie, who was mentioned in court documents, actually referred to a minor who was 17 at the time and who had assisted Thompson in luring his victim to his car by way of illicit substances. And yes, that has been confirmed to me directly by the victim's family. After her husband's arrest, Stephanie would stop pursuing the divorce, despite her mother having put approximately $15,000 into lawyer fees to help her do so.
So that was roughly $12,000. And so I took the money, I hired her a lawyer. Now, the reason it was so expensive is because she was in California, but she lived in Washington, and the divorce had to take place in Washington. And we found one, and they needed a $10,000 retainer. So I gave them $10,000, and she never got divorced.
Money that Stephanie has never paid back and purportedly even told her mother that she has no intention of doing.
So pretty soon it was negative, and now it's $16,000 that we owe, that I co-signed for, that I get the email every month. I get the new balance. I mean, and I'm sitting here thinking at this point, maybe I need to file bankruptcy, because now the lawyers are coming after me because they can't get a hold of her.
Instead, on August 14th, 2020, a letter was sent to both parties and their lawyers by the Clark County Clerk's Office noting that no action of record has been taken on this case in the past 12 months, and that the case would be dismissed if nothing was filed or sent to the court within 30 days of this notice. On October 21st, 2020, the case was officially dismissed by the Clark County Clerk's Office, which concluded that the court finds that no good cause has been shown why a dismissal should not be entered.
What happened in the process is he kidnapped a 14-year-old girl, and that's a terrible story in itself. And then he got captured, and he went to prison, and so it's not like there was anything that could happen anymore. But those fees and then that's when Stephanie's like, "Well, I don't need to pay the divorce lawyer anymore then." And I'm like, "But we need to pay what we owe, because now there's interest and there's more fees." And I mean but no, she's like, "Well, he didn't do anything for me. He didn't get me divorced, so I'm done."
Instead, in late 2021, Stephanie Thompson started searching for a new man and came across Drew Jenkins through Facebook dating. The two began talking online while Stephanie continued to live with her mother in their 3-bedroom Oregon apartment. In early March 2022, Stephanie Thompson and her 2 daughters abruptly moved in with Drew Jenkins and his son in his 1-bedroom subsidized apartment. Stephanie would become pregnant almost immediately and miscarry a month later in early April 2022. In subsequent subsequent TikTok videos that year, Stephanie would indicate that she was actively trying to get pregnant with Drew and expand their family.
So I'm struggling to have a baby. I am. It's been 6 months me and my partner, my man, have been trying to have a baby together. And it's stressful. We already lost one at 8.5 weeks. When we go in there to see our baby's heart beating, it's not beating. Okay? This is hard shit for people to have to go through. So to go into people's comments when they're talking about how much this is killing them and affecting them and wanting a baby is hurting them and just say, oh, you're crazy, lady. You can fuck off. Seriously. That is so insensitive and completely not okay. I'm so thrown off by it, and this comment came from my sister's friend, and I'm literally like, bro, first of all, the only way you talk sideways to me is because you are so jealous of my relationship with my sister. My sister's friends are always like that. They're always like, I gotta be a bitch to her sister because the relationship her and her sister have are intimidating. Okay, well, it's never worked. Me and my sister are still solid and always will be. But don't come in my comments and tell me I'm crazy for wanting a baby. You can fuck off.
And that she had quit her job to become a stay-at-home mom, which she found to be challenging and routinely complained about.
Because it's mother-flipping frustrating when you've got more than one especially coming at you like, hey mom, can I do this? Hey mom, do this. Mom, go make me dinner. You in the kitchen? Okay, I'm in the kitchen making dinner. But then they come at me with, mom, the cat puked, come pick up the puke. Mom, I just dropped this. Mom. And it's like, bitch, who the fuck is Stephanie anymore? I don't even know. I was going to come on here and talk about something completely different, but I'm going to flip and pop. I used to think that parents who said, I can't wait for school to be back, were like the most horrible fucking people in the world, Just awful. But I get it. Man, they don't stop. And now it's just like every 10 seconds. Mom. Bro, I go in the bathroom and they're right there. I go in the kitchen and they're right there. I go anywhere, they're there. I just want to be me for 5 seconds. Just 5 minutes. I want me. I want to make a video and not have to worry that my kid came in the video and it's going to get taken down. Or I want to watch something on the TV for 5 minutes and I don't have to be like, close your damn eyes, get out of here because it's my damn bedroom. Why are you in here?
That same year, her relationship with her mother began to break down yet again, as Maurice had raised concerns about the fact that her daughter had moved herself and her 2 daughters into a 1-bedroom apartment with a man she barely knew.
Now, Stephanie was paying a third of the rent, and a third of my income was coming from Stephanie so that I could pay the rest of the rent. So when she left me to go live with Drew, not only did she take a third of my income, but she took a third of the rent, which meant all of a sudden I was responsible for 2/3 with no money. And I was like, okay, this is crazy. But when they had first met, Drew had said, we won't do that to your mom. Well, you can stay living with your mom until the end of your lease. And by then I'll have the money for a 2-bedroom apartment.
Right.
Which I thought, oh, that's great. How awesome that he sees that. He understands that they're going to be together, but they're going to do this. Next thing I know, and it happened literally overnight, where she comes home and she says, Drew and I decided that we want to be together right now. And I'm like, okay. And then I was like, but what about the fact that you guys are moving into a 1-bedroom apartment? How's that going to work? And she told me that Drew had told her that the landlord was going to let them know as soon as the 2-bedroom was open and let them move in. Well, now I'm finding out that the landlord never even knew she moved in. So and did Stephanie believe him when he told her that? I mean, or was she lying to me? I mean, it's hard to say, but, and then it was just kind of a gradual thing that happened when I have a big mouth. And when I see my kids are in a situation they shouldn't be in, I tend to say something. I tend to say, I don't think Drew's treating you right.
Well,
I
you
told
love your
her,
daughter and you love your grandkids, right?
yeah, I was like, I don't think this is a good situation. I don't think that, opening the front door and seeing all three of your kids sardined in the living room, and you guys got this nice room. I just don't think this is right. I think there's something going on here. And, oh, it's just going to be for a little while. It's just until we get our 2-bedroom apartment. Well, that never happened.
Conflict which is reflected throughout Stephanie's content beginning in 2022 and continuing into the present.
I thought that this was like an old way of thinking, you know what I mean? But like, my family never jives with my partners. Me being a female in the family, my life choices, my life partners. Barely any acceptance, you know what I'm saying? But like, my brothers get a girl, and we're all accepting them. She'd be like the sister of the family for fucking 6 months before she'd be crazy, and we all knew it the whole time. But I bring around something solid, and you all can't accept it? Like, I'm getting really tired of trying to be there for a family who's not there for me. Period.
In October 2022, a report would be made to Oregon's Department of Human Services by the school when Drew's son, DS, showed up with a black eye. Desiree, who was still on school paperwork at this time, was contacted about it, and she submitted photos of her son's black eye with a petition for emergency custody. Her petition, unfortunately, did not meet the exacting standards of an emergency in Oregon, which defines it as an immediate threat, and her petition was dismissed. In 2025, Stephanie would deny this allegation, but would not explain what had actually happened that led to his black eye. Finally, it has been observed by many in our community that Stephanie has an odd habit of randomly covering one of her kids' faces with an emoji every once in a while. It's unclear why she would do so, leading some to wonder if she's hiding signs of physical violence. What is clear, to me at least, is that many of the things outlined in these court documents by Stephanie and Jeremiah have an uncanny similarity to the things we are now observing and calling into question about the resilient Jenkins in 2025. Like, for example, the way Stephanie blocked a parent's contact with their child, forcing them to file for a formal custody agreement, as was the case for Desiree, the biological mother of Drew's son, DS. Or how about the concerns around neglect? Like the full diapers, underfed kids, food restrictions, sleep deprivation, poor sleep schedules, and the presence of bed bugs, all things that have been noted in Stephanie's content in the last 4 years. In fact, our leader recently stated as much on Facebook, writing, DS couldn't even remember the last time he had had a shower when Desiree picked him up this weekend, which tells me that you send them kids to school stinking but put new clothes on them. Make it make sense. You don't love him, and it shows over and over. And in another comment, sending him in fresh clothes but not letting him shower is wild, let alone that he couldn't even remember the last time he had one, which means that the last time he had one was when he was at Desiree's house that previous weekend before school started. Or what about the overcrowding in a home with too many people and animals in a too small space, like Jeremiah and his lawyer had pointed out, the exact reason the resilient Jenkins first went viral in October 2024. That and making her daughter sleep on mattresses on the floor.
I feel like I have like a one-sided friendship and relationship with my brothers and my mom, because it's like, if I don't put the effort out there, if I don't throw the effort out there, it's like somehow there's no like effort in the relationship. But they don't want to do that for me. Like, they're always like, how come you don't come over and see us? How come you don't come visit? And it's like, this is a two-way street, bro. You could come over here and visit me. And then a couple of times it's been brought up like, oh, but we just have a little more space when you come over here. That says enough to me about why you don't come around here. Y'all don't want to come up in here because we're crammed in our little space with our 3 kids and my husband and a baby on the way, and you're uncomfortable being in a small space with my family. But like, honestly, it gets me because they haven't once come up in here to see me since I moved in with my man. And like, the only time anyone makes plans to come see each other is if I reach out and say, hey, do you guys have time like this day or this day? And I make the fucking plans happen. I love you guys and I want you around in my life, but if you can't even come into my house with my children and eat a meal at my table because you're just uncomfortable with my space, why am I supposed to push myself to go be comfortable in your space when that makes me uncomfortable?
Or how about the isolation of the children from friends and family, as alleged by both parents, which presently Stephanie and Drew are also doing, blocking everything from sleepovers, visiting friends and family, attending summer camp, or sending their kids to daycare.
Why does everybody keep saying that? Who just sends their kids to camps? Who just sends their kids to be with somebody else that could do whatever? Who does that? It's like they're trying to get me to send them to situations where they can catch our kids without you and I around. No. Nice try.
I'm not gonna justify the reason that being home with my kids. It's either I pay someone to watch my kids and raise them a way that I don't agree with, or I stay home and raise my kids and get to watch them grow and become their people. And that's the choice that I would rather have.
And one of the kids that's in his class happens to also be in the same apartment complex as us, and he's always wanting to knock on our door. Can your son come play with us? You know, I don't want to say my son's name. But me personally, even though this other child is also like 7, 8 years old, I have no problem telling this child to his face, no, my kid is not going to come hang out with you. You're a terrible influence. Also, when you can tell other moms are not taking responsibility for the actions of their children, and you just happen to be the mom that is always interacting with said children, like, do you feel it's wrong for you to be like, hey, I'm going to put the foot down because your mama ain't doing it, so get. It doesn't feel wrong in my gut. I don't think I'm doing anything wrong by trying to dictate, you know, who my kids hang out with.
Hell, they even fought court-ordered visitation between DS and his mother Desiree, until she lawyered up anyways. In fact, at one point, Stephanie even attempted to homeschool her children and then gave up a few months later, presumably because it was too much work.
I feel like any good parent suffers with mom guilt, dad guilt, whatever. You know, because like it takes a certain amount of guilt to make the right decisions for your children. But bro, tell me why it seems like no matter what the fuck you do, you get the guilt, bro. Because I tried to bring my kids home to homeschool them this year, and it's just not working out. They're begging to go back to school. And I thought I was making the right decision because we live in a shit-ass district with crappy kids up in that school, bro. It was horrible last year. But somehow my kids want to go back. So I got this appointment set up with the principal tomorrow to try to basically humble myself and be like, yo, I cannot homeschool my kids and they want to come back.
Or how about Stephanie willingly ignoring the warnings of her mother about her partner? I mean, she even ignored Jeremiah's own mother's warnings. Just as she did with Jeremiah, Stephanie has also chosen Drew over common sense and concerns raised by family, once more framing her mother as quote-unquote toxic and the agitator in the situation.
Like, my mom wasn't even talking to me. It was the same situation like it is with me and Drew. I cut my mom out because she was, to me, a toxic person.
Or how about the involvement of child services and Stephanie's negative reaction to child wellness checks, as stated by Jeremiah, something that she has also demonstrated in recent live stream rants.
A lot of the times, these allegations and these things that these caseworkers show up to our door with, which is what they are, allegations, I will tell them, you can't just keep coming to our door based on allegations you're getting from people on social media. I know how it works. They need to be people who interact with us, who actually see these kids and would know what condition that they're reporting, supposedly. And you're not just able to just be like, oh, this is what it is.
I see that people did bring up my history with CPS. If you think that didn't teach me how to cross my T's and dot my I's, then that would be crazy.
Or what about all the damning allegations against Stephanie hitting her kids, including by her husband when her daughters were just 3 and 1? How does one explain multiple accusations over the span of 5 years by individuals who are not connected or even aware of each other's claims? And what about all the lies that Stephanie has told us so far, including the ones that were contradicted by Stephanie herself in this video and court documents? After all, she has basically admitted to lying on a restraining order that her husband groomed their children. She also lied about not knowing about his crimes. She has lied about her mother essaying her, begging the question, for me at least, what else has she lied about?
And I'm not saying that I lied about anything because I never lie. That's just not something I do. It's embedded in me to not just say stuff that's not true.
However, when I'm mad or heated, and I think this is going to be reality for a lot of people, I definitely exaggerate a bit. So I want to clear the air on one thing, because look, deep down, I'm always going to love my mama, okay? She's my mom. But now, and I going forward for I don't know how many foreseeable time, like, I don't see a relationship forming with me and my mom again. I just don't. But when I started to say the whole essay thing, I stopped myself, because I knew that y'all were going to spin it and take something that I wasn't trying to mean. I didn't know a more sensitive way to bring up that my mom was just schmexually weird.
And for the record, I hate that I even have to ask that question. I hate that I even have a seed of doubt when it comes to the things that Stephanie has outlined about her relationship with her husband. More importantly, though, at what point does the growing mountain of evidence against Stephanie Lynn Thompson become overwhelming enough for people to finally stop supporting her, or for Stephanie herself to just finally acknowledge that what she's putting onto the internet is not normal and should not be normalized, let alone celebrated under the guise of authenticity and being genuine? Child and neglect is not authenticity, it is not genuine, and it is not okay. And more importantly than that, when is Stephanie Thompson finally going to express the same level of concern for the well-being of her children as her husband did? When is she going to actually take the steps necessary to improve their situation, which has only worsened over the course of the last year alone? The fact is, Curslings, I don't think Stephanie Lynn Thompson actually cares. She doesn't give a fuck. I think her children are props for her ego and a way for her to control those around her. I think she has a pregnancy fetish and a race kink. And I think she is the type of woman who values male attention and her sexual partners over everything else in her life, including her children.
I'm gonna keep my Yanni wash in the snack bin as a little hint to him, because after I'm done with the Yanni wash, he better know I'm the snack.
So much so that she is willing to inflict untold trauma onto her children in pursuit of those men and maintaining those toxic relationships. That is the genuine and authentic Stephanie Thompson.
So you mean to tell me, all of you women that are on my comments and in my page, like, well, my man would never, and my man this, and you talk your man up like he's the best, and that's awesome for you. But if you look back on our content, that was the case for me as well, okay? Because that really was how it was going down. Drew and I were doing things cohesively, and it was working. Tell me, those men that you're talking about, as soon as they hit a wall where mental state, declines, or they stop being the man that supposedly you like to talk up, you're just gonna give up just right then? The man that you so much supposedly love that much, you just give up on?
Not the guys she has managed to sell to 300,000 people under the false moniker of the resilient Jenkins, because there is nothing resilient about subjecting 5 children to abject poverty, neglect, and internet scrutiny. And I have to wonder how things would have played out with her husband had Jeremiah not been a registered sex offender who reoffended. Something tells me that if he did not have that propensity for deviancy, that his legal team would have steamrolled Stephanie.
They send me the email, and I had sent it to her.
But that's why she's blaming you for having to file bankruptcy, essentially.
Yeah, because of that. Because she says I made her get an attorney. That she didn't want an attorney. She didn't want to hire an attorney. That I forced her into it. And I'm like, dude, if you didn't get an attorney when you did, Jeremiah would have your girls.
Anyway, that's it for me. I want to thank everyone for liking, commenting, and subscribing, with a big thank you to my mods and members as always. You guys are rad, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!